Hello. Pay attention. Put your phone down.
I didn't. You say that, but we've all been here waiting for you to arrive from interviewing Elton John, and I can't be blamed for being jealous.
More of that tomorrow.
More of that tomorrow. Are we even allowed to say what I've just said? Can we say?
I think so. I think that's fine. We'll be saying that on the news later on today. So newscasters can have the early scoop.
Laura's interviewed Elton John on a weekend when Europe, music and politics combines.
Indeed so. Music and arts and politics are all perhaps much closer than they first appear. It is Eurovision and a look ahead to a giant Euro summit, the first of its kind since the UK left the European Union.
So here we go. You can judge for yourself if the glamorous event with the cameras, the lights and the action is either EU-UK summitry or Eurovision.
Hello, it's Laura in the studio.
It's Paddy in the studio.
And with us this afternoon, in a few minutes' time, is Sam White, Keir Starmer's former Chief of Staff, who joined us exactly a year ago, giving us all sorts of interesting insights into the brain of the man who was about to become Prime Minister. Now, of course, he is Prime Minister and he has a big day on Monday, doesn't he, Paddy?
Well, yes, he's done a UK-US trade deal, criticised as light by critics. He's done a UK-India trade deal, criticised as light by critics. And he's now about to do a UK-EU deal, criticised by people who don't want one at all and criticised as light.
Yes, and he will be celebrating that with a whiz-bang, massive, formal EU summit with the UK in London on Monday. And it's going to be, as someone said to me, everyone's going to be there apart from the King and Paddington Bear. It's going to be a big diplomatic roll out the red carpet, Lancaster House, a warship coming up the Thames where the leaders are going to have their lunch and all those Kodak moments. So it is going to be huge in terms of choreography and diplomatic sort of glitz, if there is such a thing. That is not necessarily going to be matched by what the substance of the thing is, which I think before we say anything else, if you talk to people in government about privately, the main thrust of this, and there's a lot to it, and there are going to be big announcements on defence and all sorts of other things, it's trying to fix the holes in the Brexit deal that was done by the previous government. So this is not, beware of the spin, this is not going to be a brand new big trade deal. This is trying to improve what was called the TCA, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement that was done under the Conservatives. So bear that in mind, smart newscasters, while you read and listen and watch the news in the next 72 hours.
So I rang a few people who know this subject better than I, and they said it is historic because it's the first pan-everything deal since Brexit. So there was the Windsor Agreement when Ursula von der Leyen said, "Dear Rishi." And we can't compare this to the Windsor Agreement because that was Northern Ireland specific.
Correct. And if we are 4 minutes in before we got to an impression, I think that what took you so long?
So this is fishing, youth mobility, defence. So we have to say, critics of Keir Starmer, I've already mentioned them at the top, but fans of Keir Starmer will say he's a Prime Minister who's tackling our post-Brexit relationship. His name's Keir Starmer. The Tories didn't manage it.
Indeed. And there will be chapters, as it's known, in the Speak with diplomatic language on energy, on energy markets, on data sharing. Defence and security will be a big feature of it, as you suggest. There will be some sort of agreement on youth mobility. So young people from here, finding it easier to go and live and work in the EU for a period of time and vice versa. But as we record at 3 on Saturday, I'm told that deal is not yet done. There are still sticking points on guess what when it comes to the EU and UK. Guess what?
Fish.
Fish. Of course, fish. Still sticking plus.
Sticky fish. There's a sticky fish.
Farcical.
Don't you mean a slippery fish?
Yeah, well, one country, as people say diplomatically in these conversations, one of the coastal states. And you say, you mean France?
France.
Yes. France is being tricky about slippery fish.
It's worth saying this is what the Brexiteers always said, that basically Brussels is a gang. And the French beat us up over fish. The Germans, they wanted to flog their cars everywhere. Then you had mission creep in Brussels. I'm about to speak to Nigel Farage for Broadcasting House tomorrow. He thinks any deal it should be ripped up before he's even seen it.
Well, it's interesting. The Tories are saying that too. And, you know, one might wager that senior politicians might want to wait to read the thing before they say it's not worth the paper it's written on. However, that is not always a feature of our modern political debate. Sometimes people like to get their arguments in early.
We're about to speak to someone who was Keir Starmer's brain, and we'll meet him in a moment. But you, Laura Kuenssberg, woman of politics.
What have I done now?
If Keir Starmer does pull a deal off after the US one, after the India one, can we say the government's having a moment? I
think in government they believe that they are. Someone said to me, look, this is about the sort of animal spirits. We're going for the hat trick, a minister said as well. I think, look, it's a government that for a long time has been struggling to have very much positive to say. They can say and will say, I think from Monday, whatever is in the final black and white, they'll say, look, we've done not just one deal, not just two deals, but look, a third deal. This is Starmer rolling up his sleeves and getting things done that the Tories hadn't finished. And I think if you also put that together with the better economic figures this week, which after all, getting the economy growing has been the government's number one priority. Was it last weekend or the week before? You and I talked a little bit about, well, maybe actually the signs are there that the doom forecasters might actually have to pipe down a little bit in the coming weeks. In the last few days, the doommeisters have piped down a little bit. So I think, yeah, just as the weather is terribly sunny, there is a bit more in government of, oh, well, maybe, yeah, maybe.
Having found government, they found government really hard as soon as they got there.
Very hard.
And now maybe they're seeing what is possible. Okay, so let's put this to a man who joined us exactly a year ago on the same weekend. Keir Starmer's former chief of staff, Sam White.
Hello, good to be back.
Sam, what of all the things we've just said, hashed up, what do you most agree with and most disagree with in a sentence?
I think I most disagree with the fact that I was Keir Starmer's brain. He definitely is not short of brains. That's never been his accusation. What I most agree with is I think this is a moment. I do think this is, you know, the first EU leaders level discussion covering a whole bunch of the problems with the current relationship with the EU. And I think Laura made a good point that these aren't conventional trade deals, but what they all have in common is they are tidying up some problems with the trading environment and making it easier for British companies to trade. You know, India, US, and hopefully what is brought to agreement tomorrow. But like Laura, I've also had sources in the last hour telling me they are still deep in negotiation, and it is in its traditional European way going to always go to the wire, late at night, etc., etc. We've been here before.
They almost can't breathe if it doesn't happen like that. You know, both sides always furiously briefing, it will come down to the wire. And I think that's sort of true, but it's also a bit like journalists. If there isn't a deadline, they can't get anything done. I suppose, Sam, where do you think the political risks are? Because yes, reform and the Conservatives are predictably, if you like, warming up to criticise it before it's even been done. There is, however, to get some goodies from the EU, there might have to be some cash put on the table by the UK. There may also have to be accepting more EU rules in some areas. That's how the EU works. We are the much smaller party in this negotiation, and the EU plays a very, very, very hard ball game. So do you think there is political risk in the UK being seen to give anything at all to get back something?
Yes, I think there's always risk and there's always opportunity, and these things do involve taking some risk to move things forward. I think if you start from what are they trying to achieve, I think if they manage to get something on the making it easier to trade on the kind of number one agenda of the government, growth, and that ultimately translates to something like a reduction in the cost of food on the shelves for regular human beings who don't care about the EU treaties or trade deals, but do like to buy stuff in the supermarket, they will consider that a huge win. I think the second area is the geopolitics, the risk. You know, we actually have a land war in Europe now. You know, Russia is looking like a dangerous part of the world, and the world is looking like a less secure place. So I think those are the wins they're after. In terms of the risk, you're absolutely right. I mean, there is risk here. They will be accused of all sorts of things, whatever they do. I think many of the opponents have got out before the deal has even being negotiated to say this is a betrayal. I think they will attempt to say this is free movement of people. I think that will be nonsense. I think at most you're going to get something on limited number of students for limited periods as part of this youth mobility issue. I think to equate that with the old rules of single market membership, where every single person in the European Union had complete rights to free movement for work or to live or any of those things.
Yeah. I wonder, can you let us in on a secret? I was rude and superficious, whatever the word is, to say you were his brain. But can you just tell us what Keir Starmer's core beliefs are about Europe? What is he when it comes to Europe? If I think of all the people in my life who absolutely love it and wear EU bonnets, and all the people in my life who are Brexiteers, what kind of a European is Keir Starmer?
So I think Keir is the sort of European he is for almost all policy. He is like a ruthless pragmatist, and he gets a lot of criticism for this. But when I kind of think about the values that I saw really motivate him, one of them was public service. He really, I don't know why he feels it as strong as he does.
But he was a Remainer, though, is what I mean.
His mum. Yeah, no, I'll totally get to that. But on the side of sort of policy and ideology and things like that, what I've always found, he is someone who's really open to evidence and is very good at saying, right, strategy is context dependent. What do we need to achieve here? What is the evidence suggesting will work? What's the current situation? And thus he doesn't so often get trapped in ideological dead ends or in positions he can't shift out of. He's very good at saying, right, what do we need to do in the British national interest? And in that sense, I think he's broadly pro-European, but he's definitely not a fanatic, and he's definitely only going to be looking for deals that he thinks are going to be in the British national interest.
When he, therefore, at Labour conference some years ago, delivered with a huge flourish the fact that, yes, Remain should be on the ballot paper, delighting the audience, was he being then the ruthless pragmatist that meant he became the next leader of the party? So he didn't really mean it, because lots of people in that hall fell for that line if it was pragmatism rather than an emotional hurrah for our European friends.
So I think that's to my point around good strategy is context dependent, and this was
so he was presenting it for his own reasons.
No. I was making a slightly different point. The context we were in then was, we hadn't quite been through the hellish full duration of the Brexit negotiations and the fact that they continued all the way into early COVID. We weren't given any respite between the two, and I think the Keir went into the election last year was a Keir who had correctly deduced that the British public had zero appetite to reopen the Brexit arguments that had absolutely paralysed us for years.
It's
and
interesting.
It was time to move forward.
Yeah, and of course it's interesting. Newscasters will be shouting at their earbuds. The Tories ate themselves by Brexit. It completely changed the right in Britain. And this was David Cameron's referendum. He was going to stay as Prime Minister. As soon as the result came in, he scampered away. We've had 87 Tory Prime Ministers in 6 seconds. So for you, a Labour person, I'm going to own that from the chair with Laura. There's a Tory catastrophe attached to this. But isn't there an interesting voter decision coming if the Green Party and the Lib Dems and the SNP say, actually, we do want to rejoin one day? That could open up a bit of water between the Labour government and the left.
Yeah, I mean, I'm speaking for myself now, not as a spokesman for anyone, but my view is we're a very, very, very long way from any debate about rejoining. I think that's for a couple of reasons. One is I think it's so fresh what we've been through, and two, I don't think we're going to get anywhere near as good a deal if we did ever attempt to rejoin as we had at the point we left. We had actually a pretty sweet deal where we opted out of all the bits we didn't like, the euro, the Schengen free movement, parts of justice and home affairs. We got ourselves a nice little rebate thanks to Margaret Thatcher. We had sort of the best of all worlds, and unfortunately we did give that up. And I don't think if we did have a discussion about rejoining at any point in my lifetime, we'd be offered anything as sweet as that again.
I don't think you sense any appetite for that really from anybody in sort of senior places in any of the parties. What you do get though, Paddy, is you get from the Lib Dems and the Greens and the SNP joining for a closer kind of deal than the one that Labour is going to try to achieve on Monday. They would argue for going back into the customs union. But here's an interesting counter to that from somebody in government said to me this week, well, it's all very well you arguing for that and I'm paraphrasing, but we wouldn't therefore have had the deal with the US if we'd done that. We wouldn't have the deal with the Indians if we'd done that, because if we were in a customs union, yes, you'd have to follow EU rules, but you also can't negotiate as a one-man band. So what's fascinating about this to me is that you see somebody who many people in the Labour Party saw as their Remainer-in-Chief, Keir Starmer, actually being the person who is tidying up some of the loose ends of the Brexit deal the Tories did, and making the most of some of the opportunities that Brexit gave them, as in being able to do deals with big countries like India and America, even though those deals are not massive tomes that are going to completely transform everything. It's interesting that it's a Labour Prime Minister who's been able to make the most of this.
Yeah, I mean, if I can come in on that one, I think if Britain was still a member of the trading bloc with Europe, we wouldn't be doing different deals of the sort we've done in the last sort of kind of week or so. Our economy would be significantly bigger, our productivity would be significantly higher. We'd have fewer problems with trading at our borders, and we'd have more money for our public services. So there would be some upsides if we were still a member. Given we're not, and we're not likely to rejoin, you've got to make the best of the hand you've got. And I think doing trade deals in this slightly volatile, might makes right sort of world order we seem to be stepping into is probably the best you can do as a medium-sized trading nation trying to make your way.
So there is going to be some kind of agreement in principle, even if it's all signed, sealed and delivered, on this notion of youth mobility. There's been an argument about what the time limit should be. The EU started off saying we'd like our young people to be able to go to the UK to live, work, study for 4 years. The UK said, you're having a laugh. We're not in the market for more than a year or 2 years. There's also an argument about whether or not European EU students coming to the UK should pay the same fees as other students if they end up studying here as other overseas students, or whether they should get some kind of discounted rate. This is an area that is still fraught, part because of the nuts and bolts of the agreement. And also, Sam, I don't know if you'd agree, I think this is what is fraught when it comes to the notion of immigration. We are already seeing Starmer's opponents use this as a way to say freedom of movement by the back door. Now, Sam, you said you thought that would be nonsense in terms of the facts, but it is politically risky, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, just let's take fact before the risk. The membership of the single market means you have 4 fundamental freedoms, one of which is free movement of people. So the 500,000 Europeans can move around as they like. This is not, sorry, 500 million, I mean. This is not remotely in the same scale by factors of hundreds and thousands of times that what we're talking about here. This is a possible deal, which hasn't even been made yet, for a relatively fixed number of students to move temporarily between member states, which will benefit British students as much as anyone else. So I think it's the height of cynicism and deeply dishonourable for the opposition to pretending that this is anything like free movement of people. It's not. But I think what's really sealed the deal was 2023, where quadrupling of net migration led to nearly 1 million new entrants. And love migration, hate migration. I don't think anyone thinks 1 million per year is the right number that this country can accommodate without noticing, while it's been incredibly bad at building houses and infrastructure. So I think you do need to have a sensible conversation about what is the right amount of net migration, what is the right composition of that migration, and what do you need to do in the UK in terms of skills and other restrictions. I think that's a very sensible debate to be having. And I don't think the any small amount of European students makes any fundamental difference to that. As for the political risk, I mean, I think it's down for journalists and others to hold to account people who are talking absolute nonsense. That is not equivalent to 500 million Europeans having total rights to free movement.
In terms of the political landscape, it's interesting when you ask pollsters about this, as we're doing in the last week, people say, look, because you've seen over time, more and more people think that Brexit was a mistake and that it was terribly handled by the politicians. Whether they were Leave or Remain, they go, that was all really messy and the politicians messed it up. That means that there is a sort of latitude, there's a bit of permission, if you like, from the electorate for the government to go in and make some changes, and to go in and say, as they said in the general election, that they would have improved closer ties with the European Union. But I just wonder, Sam, if you think there is a limit to that. Love him or loathe him, you've got Farage on the scene now. You do have a lot of voters who've got residual anger about what happened in like Brexit not being done properly in their name. You know, where is the limit? Do you think Labour worries about there being a line beyond which they can't cross?
I think you're right. There is anger about Brexit. I think, I can't deny it. There has been a Brexit betrayal. It was conducted by Nigel Farage and others in the run up to 2016, where they missold something to the British public. Do you remember Nigel Farage saying food was going to cost more, or we were all going to be poorer, or there was going to be less money for public services, or more bureaucracy and sort of paperwork at the border?
He keeps winning, though, doesn't he? Whatever he said then, he keeps winning. He just beat Labour at the polls in the locals.
He's very good, Paddy, and you have a chance tomorrow to say to him, because his current line is no, no, no. That's not the snake oil I'm selling today. That's snake oil I was selling a few years ago. I'm selling a new brand of snake oil this year called 200 billion of unfunded Liz Truss spending cuts in my manifesto. Buy that instead. Whereas I think we still haven't finished cleaning up the mess from his last big idea. And I think, if you have the opportunity tomorrow to put it to him, Paddy, hold him to account for every bit of disappointment that people who took him at his word and voted for something they thought was going to make their lives better and lead to sort of better economy and cheaper food and things like that. And it's had the opposite effect that, Nigel, if I'm wrong about Brexit, I'm wrong about everything. Farage was wrong about Brexit, and he's let people down, and he's not yet been held accountable for that.
There'll be some newscasters, though, also screaming at you, Sam, saying, well, hang on, there were also lots of politicians in the Labour Party and the Conservative Party who said that they would respect the result, whatever it was, and then took lots and lots of opportunities to hold it up in Parliament and to block it all over the place. And this is an interesting thing, without wanting to relitigate this. I just wonder how much in the next few days it's going to feel like deja vu. Are we going to be having these same arguments? I mean, and I ended up having a long, complicated conversation with someone in government about phytosanitary arrangements. I thought, ye gods, it is 2019, save me. All these things, all these issues are still the same issues, even though the political landscape is very different.
Now, winter fuel payments. The papers say Labour's going to row back. Sam, would you advise a change of sorts on the winter fuel position of the Labour government?
I don't have any particular knowledge about whether they will or won't. It seems to be being briefed both ways at the moment, which I suspect represents the conflict within the Labour Party, which has caused a huge amount of disquiet among Labour MPs. Should they or shouldn't they? I mean, it's not for me to advise. I probably would see the course through now. I think they've taken a lot of the damage for this policy already. I think they can legitimately say that their increases in the pensioners through the triple lock and things like that more than compensate the vast majority of pensioners. And I don't know that I would necessarily go back on that myself. But hey, I'm a public member of the public, innocent bystander now.
Innocent bystander? Are you sure? I think you've still got a few important people on your speed dial.
I'd
Sam
love
White.
to see your speed dial. I'd love you to go through that contacts book and ring a few now. Hello, Sam. How are you?
Well, Sam, we're also delighted that you're a newscaster and delighted that you've been back a year on helping us with Newscast. And let's hope we talk to you maybe before another 12 months, because it's great to have you with us.
See you next time Eurovision's on.
Thanks, Sam.
Bye.
Well, Sam has very neatly got us to our next subject of conversation, and I'm just going to hand the conch entirely over to you, Mr. O'Connell. You are a proper Eurovision aficionado. I'm a mere amateur. So what should we look out for, and what are you looking forward to?
Well, you say that. I've only been to 20 of them.
Is that all?
And I only saved Terry Wogan's life at one of them. We were walking up a near vertical ladder in the stadium in Ukraine, where we both were, and he, at the top with his Bailey's bottle, got trapped in the ladder and nearly fell backwards, and I held the great Wogan posterior against the ladder, and he said, "Paddy, my boy, your time will come." So I have lovely memories of Eurovision, and I love the way that the British reveal something about themselves. We've got the best music and the best sense of humour, and then we generally lose both when it comes to Eurovision. So this year, I think you've got to look out for another possible win for Sweden.
Oh.
I think you also can say the juries will really go for the UK. They will give them points. We'll get points from the juries.
So it won't be nul
It
point.
won't be no point. And you have to remember there are 2 votes tonight. There's the televote.
Yes.
And there's a lot of camp spectacle, which the televote will go for, I think.
Yes.
But look for jury points for the UK, our fabulous country, and we wish them very well.
It's quite catchy.
Yes, they can sing, because the BBC has also toyed for many years with sending people who actually can't sing or can't dance. So the BBC's done really well as the gatekeeper.
So Remember Monday, they're called.
They're called Remember Monday. Thank you very much for listening, and we hope you'll join us tomorrow.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.